Raúl, ¿se escucha?
Sí, sí, le escucho, perfecto.
Ok, ahora la otra
Voy a
consola.
probar la segunda.
Muy buenos días a todas y todos.
Good morning, everyone. The Secretariat tells me that we have a quorum. I would like to bring this special session of the Permanent Council to order to hear the report of CAP with respect to the status of the negotiations on the organization's program budget for 2026 and to consider the draft resolution of the program budget of the organization for 2026. Acting as the preparatory committee of the General Assembly in keeping with Article 91C of the OAS Charter. In keeping with the provisions of Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure, as well as the urgency exception provided for in Article 48, I would like to submit to the consideration of the Permanent Council the draft agenda contained in document CP/OD 2566/25. Item 2, report on the status of the negotiations in the CAP on the organization's program budget for 2026. As the next item on the order of business, we will now hear the report of the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs with respect to negotiations on the program budget for 2026. And I would like to greet and offer the floor to the distinguished Ambassador Alejandra Solano, Permanent Representative of Costa Rica and Chair of the CAP. Ambassador Solano, you have the floor, madam.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Chair, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, distinguished delegations. It is an honor for me, on behalf of the Committee of Administrative and Budgetary Affairs, to present the draft resolution of the program budget of the organization for 2026. This is a document that reflects weeks of technical work as well as political and collective work, and which shows a solid step forward towards an OAS that is more sustainable, transparent, and predictable. It also has a special institutional value. It is the first that our Secretary General, Mr. Albert Randin, is presenting. And this document is being elevated for the consideration of the Permanent Council in the framework of his mandate and his first year of tenure. The CAP has received and analyzed rigorously the proposal of the Secretary General, and after a process of lengthy discussion and changes and consultations, we can present a text that was, as I said, debated amongst member states. Some delegations have requested more time to evaluate some of the proposals in the text. This budgetary exercise has been one of the most demanding of recent years, but it has also been very constructive. We are facing financial limitations, multiple priorities. Nonetheless, we have reached an agreement on most issues in a balanced and responsible way, which allows us to project the organization into the future with stability without losing sight of the ambition of the mandates that are vested in our organization by member states. The text that we are submitting to the Permanent Council today is and to the General Assembly, is the result, an outcome of a serious, transparent, and participatory process. Each paragraph was debated with respect, and each was studied with great openness. We are reaffirming the values that uphold the work of CAP and this organization: austerity, efficiency, accountability, and transparency. Mechanisms of control and auditing are consolidated. Financial discipline is strengthened, and we have a more technical planification included, which seeks to ensure the sustainability of the regular fund and the ICR, indirect cost recovery. At the same time, we are going towards a more modern General Secretariat using an evidence-based management. The resolution instructs the General Secretariat to undertake integral auditing on the workforce and on the medical benefit system. And it is also moving forward with the implementation of OAS Core with enough time to address the adjustments that the states have requested and the adoption of international accounting standards. This reinforces the governance of the capital fund and the strategy of physical assets, ensuring transparency in the use of resources and the future operations of the organization. This text also reflects the political priorities of the member states. It ensures a balanced treatment of the OAS 4 pillars: democracy, human rights, multidimensional security, and integral development. The institutional response of the General Secretariat to the situation in Haiti is strengthened. We also have a mandate with respect to gender parity and geographic representation in keeping with the stipulations of the OAS Charter. And we have the consolidation of a accountability framework that is clear with respect to the mandates that emanate from the General Assembly. There is consensus on most issues, and this is thanks to many actors. I want to begin by thanking the mission of Costa Rica to the OAS. In particular, I want to thank the alternative representative, Ambassador Sami Araya Rojas. I also want to thank the wonderful work of Ileana Navarro. I want to thank her for her support during this process. At the same time, I want to express my sincere thanks to the vice chairs of the CAB. The first vice chair, Mr. Eric Luguya. I thank him for his valuable collaboration in leading the negotiation process as the alternate representative of Canada to the OAS. I'd also want to thank the second vice chair, Ms. Thais Mesquita, alternate representative of Brazil, and the third vice chair, Carlos Bautista, alternate representative of Guatemala, and also Guido Pierre, who is the alternate representative of Argentina to the OAS. I also want to especially recognize Mr. Nicolas Higuera, alternate representative of Colombia. He has done a wonderful job in presenting the first disaggregated basis for the document, which facilitated the consolidation of a very successful negotiation process. I want to thank the Office of the Executive Director and his team for their technical support, particularly Mr. Javier Arnaiz and Sebastián Ordóñez. I also would like to thank our legal secretariat, especially Jean-Michel Arrigui, Melissa Cosio, and Sarah Davidson. And finally, but no less important, I want to thank all the heads of mission and in particular the accredited delegates to CAP. They came to CAP with a constructive spirit and were flexible in informal consultations and in the pre agreements ad referendum. Their willingness to undertake dialogue and to address any differences made this outcome possible. Chair, colleagues, the budget we are presenting today is not perfect, but it is legitimate, solid, and viable, and it ensures the continuity of the essential functions of the organization and the implementation of the mandates that member states have approved. It is also an expression of trust in the General Secretariat, in the leadership of Secretary General Albert Brandim in this new stage in his leadership, and our collective capacity to act with responsibility and in keeping with the hemispheric vision. This projects the OAS into the future. It includes provisions to have an integral strategic plan, 2026-2030, the strengthening of the mandates management system, the modernization of the human resources policy, full implementation of the physical asset strategy. All of this points to an OAS that is transforming itself to be better, more efficient, more coherent, and more transparent. I would like to conclude with an idea that sums up the spirit of this process. The chair never sought to impose a consensus, rather to facilitate dialogue so that member states could build it together. Although we were not always in agreement on all issues, I believe that today we can achieve that goal. Chris Voss, who is the author of multiple books on the art of negotiation, negotiate is not imposing an idea, it is synchronizing ideas. And that's what we've been doing during these recent weeks and what we will continue to do at the Special General Assembly, which we are here today to attend. We will continue to seek to synchronize our different desires, priorities, and purposes and benefit of this organization and the direct users who are the inhabitants of the Americas. On behalf of CAB, I have the honor to submit to the consideration of this Permanent Council the draft resolution of the program budget of the organization for 2026 with the recommendation that it be elevated to the Special General Assembly for its approval. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, embajadora.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ambassador. Before I give the floor to delegations, I would like to express our recognition to Ambassador Solano for her leadership in CAB. We appreciate the time, effort, and dedication invested in the negotiations of the program budget, which reflect the importance that we give to this organization and its valuable work. We also would like to congratulate the vice chairs of the CAB, the members of the committee, and the team of the Secretariat for its ongoing commitment and effort. I'd like to also greet everyone, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, your teams, and legal affairs, and I apologize for not doing that earlier. I would like to offer the floor to those delegations who would like to refer to this report. However, I would remind you at 11 we need to begin our Special General Assembly. Bahamas, you have the floor.
Good morning, all, and thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank the Chair of CAP for the presentation. Chair, as you may or may not be aware, there are a number of paragraphs that in there that contains ad refs from the delegation of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Accordingly, out of comity and out of flexibility, we will withdraw our ad refs. However, please be advised that we will be providing footnotes to all of the sections so that the proceedings can carry on. I thank everybody for their kind indulgence, and I thank you, Chair, for your kind attention.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Bahamas. Thank you for your flexibility with respect to what the ambassador mentioned and synchronizing with the collective and Ambassador Namer. We're so very grateful.
No haber más solicitudes.
If there are no further requests for the floor, the chair proposes that the Permanent Council take note of the report of the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs with respect to the status of the negotiation of the program budget. No, excuse me, Bahamas, would you like the floor again?
Mr. Chair, this is on a related matter. The Bahamas reaffirms the principle of legality as central to the OAS, that every act must rest on a legal basis, but legality must not be misused as paralysis. It was designed to restrain coercive powers, not administrative discretion, particularly in matters of financial governance. Under Articles 54E and 91F of the OAS Charter, the General Assembly is expressly empowered to approve program budget and to determine the quotas of the member states. That mandate necessarily includes the authority to regulate the conditions of payment and recording of quotas. This aligns with the principle of implied powers, as affirmed by the International Court of Justice in reparations for injuries suffered in the service of the United Nations, dated 1949, where the court upheld an organization possesses not only the powers expressly stated in its charter, but also those, and I quote, which, though not expressly provided, are conferred by necessary implications as essential to the performance of its duties. By that same reasoning, the OAS charged with managing its finances has the implicit authority to amend or discontinue mechanisms such as the prompt payment discount, which has no charter basis and now undermines the organization's liquidity and equity. It would be a misreading of legality to suggest that the absence of express position on penalties or incentives prohibits reform. The General Assembly already possesses this authority. The prompt payment discount is not a right. It is not a right. It is a policy created by resolution and may therefore be lawfully withdrawn. Chair, legality does not mean immobility. Invoking the Charter to defend a measure without legal foundation subverts both fiscal logic and institutional integrity. Chair, let us speak plainly. The OAS faces chronic liquidity challenges to the tune of approximately $500,000 per year because of the inconsistent payment of quotas. Every other multilateralism institution, from the United Nations through Article 19 to PAHO to the ILO and CARICOM, applies consequences for arrears. Only the OAS rewards punctuality while tolerating delinquency. We cannot continue to proclaim accountability while practicing indulgence. Therefore, the Bahamas rejects the notion that the Charter precludes disincentives for non-payment. If that is indeed the interpretation, then this body should rescind General Assembly Resolution 1757, the instrument that enshrines the prompt payment discount, because legality demands consistency, not convenience. And so, Chair, pursuant to Article 60 of the Rules of the Permanent Council, the delegation of the Bahamas formally requests a recorded roll call vote on the proposal, and I repeat, to discontinue effective January 1st, 2026, the granting of the prompt payment discount established in paragraph B1 of Annex A of Resolution AG/Res 1757, dated 2000. We are fully aware that under Article 58, such action requires a 2/3 majority, 23 out of 34 votes. To quote a friend and mentor, blow the bugle and see who marches. This vote will define what tune we step to and where each of us stands, for principle or privilege, for equity or exemption, for law or expediency. Either way, the Bahamas will stand firmly and unapologetically on the side of principle. Let history judge us all. Thank you, Chair. I can repeat what the request is for the vote, should the General Secretariat require that.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We have taken note thereof. I remind you that this is the preparatory committee. We cannot open debate on the merit of each intervention. That is the responsibility of the GA. And of course, we need to have certain requirements complied with. and the merit thereof will be discussed at the body defined for it, which is the Special General Assembly. This is a procedural body, and the Permanent Council is acting as the preparatory committee. So we're not going to open the debate on the merits of each of the items. Those will be elevated as is, and the report will be sent to the special GA, and it will be done at the plenary, or if the Special General Assembly would like to do so, it can actually form a general committee to do so.
Presidente, apenas uma questão de ordem.
Just a question of order, an issue of order. With respect to what you said, we are now analyzing a draft resolution. There is no other draft resolution on the table. Why the proposal for modification or any draft resolution would need to be presented in writing for our analysis. An oral presentation of an amendment is not permitted. If necessary, it needs to be presented before the General Assembly so that countries can also consider it and consider getting instructions. Because if we have these proposals from the floor orally, this would lead to chaos. No delegation would be able to get constructions 15 minutes before with respect to a proposal that had not been discussed before. The order of business was already adopted. The only item to be discussed is the report presented by Costa Rica. So I want to, well, that reaffirms the argument that I have advanced before. Bahamas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and we appreciate the gymnastics. What we do also would recommend, again, if the matter is to be transferred to the General Assembly, and if the Bahamas is out of procedural order, let this intervention serve as notice that the vote will be presented in whatever manner, at whatever occasion. Chair, I'm not surprised. This is certainly par for the course. I would have preferred to have the legal department opine on this, but nonetheless, I will not delay the proceedings any further because I am assured that this process will unfold, and we look forward to it whenever, however. Thank you very much, Chair.
Le agradezco a usted.
I thank you, and the chair will consult with the Department of Legal, but in this case, the rules are clear, so there's no consultation necessary with legal. If there are no further requests for the floor, the chair proposes that the Permanent Council takes note of the report of the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs of the status of negotiations on the program budget of the organization for 2026, presented by its chair, Ambassador Alejandra Solano. We will also take note of the interventions of the delegations, which will be included in the record and minutes of this meeting. If there are no objections, it is so agreed. Agreed.
Vamos al punto 3.
Let us move on to point 3 of the order of business. As the next point, and acting as the preparatory committee for the General Assembly, it is time to consider the draft resolution titled Program Budget of the Organization for 2026, consistent with Article 91C of the Charter of the OAS and fulfillment of Article 60C of the Charter. Pardon me, I'll repeat that. So Article 60C of the Charter, as well as Article 20B of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly and Article 37 of the Bylaws of the Permanent Council, looking forward to presentation at the 58th Special session of the General Assembly. As the chair of the CAP indicated, the draft resolution does not yet enjoy full consensus after intense negotiations, and therefore the program budget for 2026 is recommended to be elevated to the plenary of the 58th special session with the recommendation that the plenary or a general committee, if so installed, would consider solely those matters pending agreement. If there is no objection on this point, so agreed. So agreed. Having completed the points on the order of the day, we give our appreciation to the chair and vice chairs of the CAP, the members of the committee, and the secretariat team for their dedication and commitment throughout this process. Be reminded that the plenary session of the 58th special session of the Assembly General shall begin at 11 a.m. in this same room. Thank you to all the delegations for your participation. The session is adjourned. Thank you. Delegation of the member states of the Organization of American States, Ambassador Tomas Pascual, Permanent Representative of Chile and Chair of the Permanent Council and the Preparatory Committee for the General Assembly, Mr. Albert Ramdin, Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Ambassador Laura Gil, Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of American States, distinguished representatives of the member states, distinguished representatives of the permanent observer countries, representatives of the bodies, agencies, and entities of the Inter-American System and other international bodies, civil society representatives, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all. It is an honor to extend the warm welcome to the 58th special session of the General Assembly of the Organization of American States. Having verified with the Secretariat that we have a quorum pursuant to Article 52 of the Rules of Procedure, it is my pleasure to declare open the 58th special session of the General Assembly, called for the purpose of approving the organization's program budget for 2026 in accordance with the Assembly's Resolution 3048. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, pursuant to Article 12 of the Rules of Procedure, it is now time to elect a president for this special session. I'm therefore pleased to offer the floor to those delegations that wish to present their nominations. I see that the delegation of Mexico has requested the floor. Ambassador, go ahead. Thank you, Chair. The delegation of Mexico has the honor of presenting the candidacy of Ambassador Alejandra Solano Cabalceta, Permanent Representative of Costa Rica, to preside over the 58th special session of the OAS General Assembly, consistent with the established practice of having the chair of the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs, CAP, preside over the Assembly when it is called to consider the organization's program budget, provided that the member states so decide. Ambassador Solano is a career diplomat with ample multilateral experience, whose leadership here has been key in conducting exhaustive negotiations on the restructuring of the General Secretariat, the program budget for 2026, and the preparations for this special session. She has also always encouraged participation and inclusiveness based on mutual respect and the creation of safe spaces for all delegations, particularly for the participation of women. Her performance has fostered inclusion, dialogue, and consensus seeking as inspired in the OAS Charter. For that reason, the delegation of Mexico wishes to formally present her candidacy, confident that this will be broadly backed by the other member states. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The delegation of Argentina has the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to second the motion put forward by Mexico to have Alejandra Solano preside over the special session, given her role as chair of the CAP, leading negotiations on the organization's program budget for 2026. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The U.S. delegation has the floor.
The United States is honored to support the nomination of Ambassador Alejandra Solano to serve as the chair of the 58th Special Session of the General Assembly. As chair of the CAP, she demonstrated steady leadership and a deep understanding of the matters under consideration. As everyone has already referenced here, her thoughtful and balanced approach fostered constructive dialogue, consensus building, and progress. My delegation is supportive of Ambassador Solano's chairmanship, and we propose that we agree to this nomination by acclamation.
Excelente.
Ambassador Alejandra Solano, Head of Delegation and Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the OAS. I wish to express on behalf of all the delegations and on my own behalf as well our sincerest congratulations for your election as President of the 58th Special Session of the General Assembly of the OAS. We wish you success, and I am pleased now to invite you to take your place here at the head table, Ambassador.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your patience. I will echo all the greetings expressed previously. Thank you very much to everyone. Distinguished heads of delegation, Ambassador of Panama, Mr. Secretary General Albert Rabdin, Assistant Secretary General Laura Gil, delegations, colleagues. I wish to begin by expressing my sincerest gratitude for the trust that the member states have placed on my shoulders by honoring me with the responsibility of presiding over this special session of the General Assembly, number 58. Thank you to Ambassador Lucelina Baños of Mexico, Ambassador Carlos Cherniak, Permanent Representative of Argentina to the OAS, and Ambassador Kim Panland, Alternate Representative of the United States to the OAS. It is a privilege that I accept with deep gratitude and with the commitment to conduct this process with the same spirit of balance and cooperation that characterized previous work within the CAP and the Permanent Council. We are meeting today to consider the organization's program budget for 2026. This is an instrument that not only sets out figures, but translates the political priorities and institutional values of the OAS member states. This budget is also one that is special. It's the first one that Secretary General Albert Ramdin is submitting to this assembly during his first year as Secretary General. We acknowledge his openness to dialogue, the technical work done by his team, and the constructive openness that enabled the member states to revise, adjust, and ultimately reach a consensus agreement on most of the text that we are considering today. The process that led to this outcome was certainly very complex. There were intensive negotiations, multiple rounds of revision, and moments of legitimate difference. But ultimately, the sense of collective responsibility prevailed. The text before us in this General Assembly is the outgrowth of a shared effort of delegations that defended principles, but were also able to yield in order to reach a viable agreement that was sustainable. The document reaffirms the will of the member states to have a financially healthy and administratively modern organization without sacrificing the programs and mandates that reflect the more human face of the inter-American system. I wish to underscore that the budget preserves, without cuts, key areas that support the legitimacy of this organization. Resources of the Inter-American Human Rights Court, whose independent, sustained work continues to be one of the great strengths of the regional system, have not been cut, nor have there been cuts to the allocations to the Inter-American Institute of the Child in order to honor previous legal commitments. Also, academic scholarships and cooperation mechanisms and sessions of CD, the Inter-American Council on Integral Development. These are vital spaces for cooperation, technical cooperation amongst our countries. These programs are not expenses, they're investments in human capital, justice, and our future. The text balances these commitments with responsible measures to shore up the organization's financial health. There's a rationalization of operating expenses, indirect cost recovery is reinforced, and it allows for more predictable management of human and financial resources. The draft resolution further instructs comprehensive audits to be implemented, along with a consolidation of the capital fund and the adoption of international accounting standards, ensuring that every dollar managed by this organization is managed transparently and accountably. In other words, this budget has achieved something quite difficult, maintaining the OAS's social and programmatic heart while strengthening its institutional and financial health. It is a text that does not ignore restrictions, but nor does it abandon the priorities that make the multilateralism at the inter-American level possible. This sustainability cannot be built at the cost of human rights or cooperation nor access to educational opportunities, and this was understood and respected by all delegations during the negotiations. Ladies, gentlemen, head of delegation, every delegation expressed its perspective, and together we succeeded in building a budget that balances prudence with ambition, reserve with hope. The text has not been finalized, but the process has been proof of political maturity. It reflects an organization that engages in dialogue, listens, and adapts without losing its essence. Above all, it sends a message of mutual trust in the General Secretariat to execute with discipline and transparency, trust in the member states to uphold their financial commitments, and trust in an accountable OAS, and therefore a more respected and useful OAS. The budget submitted today for approval takes a long-term view. It sets the basis for a new comprehensive strategic plan, 2026-2030, strengthens mandate management and strengthens the governance of the capital fund, ensuring that the organization can plan looking ahead to the future. I'd like to highlight that the greatest achievement lies not in the text and the numbers, but in the process. The negotiations were very demanding, yet constructive. There were debates, but also respect. There were differences, but also goodwill. The active engagement of all the delegations makes the outcome of these negotiations legitimate. The lack of consensus merely means that we don't agree on some of the paragraphs, but there was a shared understanding of wishing to move towards the same goal. In that spirit, my deep thanks go to all the delegations for their commitment and their willingness to listen, understand, and be constructive. Thanks to that attitude today, we can submit for consideration to this General Assembly a sound, balanced, viable text. I'd like to close with an idea that sums up this exercise. Negotiation is not the art of concessions. It's an act of synchronization, and in this process, the member states have synchronized their efforts to protect what is essential, to bring order with responsibility, and plan with hope. In that spirit, I invite you to consider the draft resolution on the organization's program budget for 2026. Before giving the floor to delegations who wish to refer to the topic at hand, we will consider the underlying documents previously circulated. We will move forward with item 2 of the agenda before you. As provided in Article 34 of the General Assembly Rules of Procedure, it is now time to consider the draft agenda for the 58th special session of the General Assembly, agreed by the Preparatory Committee and distributed as document AG/Doc 2/25. I ask the delegations if we may proceed with approval thereof. The delegation of the Bahamas has the floor.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Chair, and good to see you proceeding this morning's events. Chair, we continue to observe the conveniences and prerogatives being selectively created within this organization. A rules-based institution cannot stand if it becomes one of rules for some and rules for none. Chair, I read meticulously the convocation notice for the earlier meeting, and with your indulgence, I wish to recall it for the record. And I quote, "The Chair of the Permanent Council invites delegations to the special meeting of the Permanent Council to receive the report of the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs on the status of negotiations on the 2026 program budget, and to consider the draft resolution titled Program Budget of the Organization for 2026. My delegation attended what should have been a Permanent Council meeting to receive that report as prescribed and as reflected in the notice. Conveniently and prematurely, the Council meeting was converted into a preparatory meeting which should have been convened after receiving the CAP's report and exhausting the agenda of the Council, not during its presentations. These aren't semantics. This is what it means to be legally compliant. We register our dismay, not surprise, as such procedural conveniences have become commonplace. And regrettably, Chair, we anticipate we may soon further see other conveniences, including the possible call for a general committee on yet another procedural and legal irregularity previously raised by my delegation yesterday and yet again this morning. We await further developments. Chair, we thank you and the Assembly for its kind attention.
Muchísimas gracias, señor embajador.
Thank you very much to the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Bahamas for those comments, and those will be reflected in the record. We will now proceed with approval of the agenda, which you have before you. I'd like to indicate that if you agree, we will go ahead and approve it. Thank you very much. Approved. We'll now move on to the draft schedule. It is now time to consider the draft schedule for this special session, distributed as document AG/Doc 3/25. I ask the delegations if we may proceed with its approval. Thank you very much. Approved. Approval of agreements adopted by the preparatory committee. That is the next item before us. It is now time to consider the recommendations regarding procedures previously adopted by the preparatory committee as contained in document AG/doc 6/25. These recommendations include the following. The maximum duration of presentations that we will hear today will be 6 minutes in the plenary. 2, pursuant to Article 20 of the Rules of Procedure, this session will conclude today, Wednesday, October 15, 2025. 3, pursuant to Articles 20 and 77 of the Rules of Procedure, the minutes of the plenary sessions will be in writing. If the General Assembly should decide to install a general committee, those minutes will be resumed. Requests for the floor during this special session will be dealt with as is customary by order of request using the system established for that purpose. The General Secretariat will ensure that recordings of sessions and meetings will be made, stored, and preserved properly, including backup copies, and made available to the member states who request them. The delegations who wish to include footnotes to the draft resolution, please announce them in this plenary session and send the text to the Secretariat before the closing session. The Secretariat will distribute the volume with the notes received within 24 hours of the closing of this session. Announced notes that are not sent in time will be incorporated later during meetings of the Style Committee. Having said this, I ask the delegations if we can proceed with approval of the recommendations regarding procedural matters as sent by the preparatory committee. Thank you very much. Approved. Item 5, which is the Secretary General's report on credentials. The next point in the order of business refers to the report of the Secretary General regarding the credentials of the delegations participating in this 58th special session of the General Assembly. In this regard, I report that in pursuant to Article 27 of the Rules of Procedure, the Secretary General has submitted the corresponding report, which has been distributed to the delegations as document AG/doc 8/25, based upon which the Secretariat has developed and distributed a provisional participants list. The aforementioned report provides the credentials presented in due time and form by the delegations of the member states, permanent observer countries, and representatives of the bodies, agencies, and entities of the Inter-American System and other international bodies. Thank you to the Secretary General for submitting said report. The President suggests to the plenary that note be taken thereof. So agreed. We move on then to item 6, approval of the organization's program budget for 2026. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, pursuant to Article 54E of the OAS Charter, it falls to this General Assembly to approve the organization's program budget and set the quotas for the member states. In fulfillment of this mandate, via Resolution 3048, adopted at the 55th regular session held in St. John's, Antigua and Barbuda, the General Assembly set the quotas to fund the regular fund for 2026 and called this special session for purposes of approving the corresponding program budget. In fulfillment thereof, we today have the responsibility before us of approving the 2026 program budget. Before continuing, I wish to reiterate on behalf of this General Assembly my deepest acknowledgments and thanks to the permanent and alternate representatives of the member states for their constructive spirit, all their dedication and commitment throughout the process of developing this draft resolution. Similarly, I wish to extend special thanks to the Secretary General and all the staff of the Secretary General and Assistant Secretary General for their ongoing technical administrative support, as well as their professionalism and commitment to properly conducting this process and completing the mandates emanating from this assembly. Their collaboration in this process has been vital to moving forward together towards the institutional and financial strengthening of our organization. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, as reported before the Permanent Council in the special session held this morning after intense negotiations and long, dedicated work days, the draft resolution does not enjoy full consensus in some of its sections. We will refer to Section 22, measures designed to encourage prompt quota payment, as well as some paragraphs that remain ad referendum of some delegations. Accordingly, the President suggests the following course of action. First, if you agree, we could first address the ad referendums after informal discussions this morning. Are you in a position to remove those, or are you ready to present a footnote in that regard? Thank you to the delegation of the Bahamas for requesting the floor. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My delegation is fully prepared to remove its ad ref, save for a specific item, and that is in respect of, I'm trying to locate the exact paragraph. I think it's paragraph 3, which entitled Limit on Jobs Positions Financed by the Regular Fund. My delegation has consulted and found that this is an illegal attempt, and we will not be party to any such illegality. So therefore, our ad ref in respect of the entire section on limit on job positions financed by regular fund, which includes A, B, C, my delegation will remain firmly against this action to restrain the ability of the Secretary General and the General Secretary to hire any numbers beyond 379. This could possibly result in people being terminated in order to stay underneath a arbitrary threshold. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Muchísimas
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have taken due note thereof. I'd like to continue to give the floor to delegations. And in that sense, St. Kitts and Nevis, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. In the spirit of unity and consensus, St. Kitts and Nevis is prepared to lift the 2 footnotes that are under its name, and we will place the 2 ad refs, and we will place a footnote on the one pertaining to staff and the steps. So we will place a footnote there. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We appreciate this information that you shared with us, and we await the text for the footnote with respect to the articles you indicated. Antigua and Barbuda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Antigua and Barbuda registers its profound concern with the proposed 2026 program budget for the organization. As such, this delegation offers, by way of a footnote to the entire resolution, the following explanation of our position. Antigua and Barbuda regrets that it cannot join consensus on the resolution entitled Program Budget for the Organization for 2026 for procedural and substantive reasons. This position is entered without prejudice to our continued engagement in the CAP and the Permanent Council, and to our commitment to the purposes and principles of the Charter and the timely payment of our assessed quota. Process and transparency. Our delegation remains concerned about the insufficient transparency in the handling of key budgetary matters. In particular, it was inappropriate that deliberations in the CAP concluded less than 24 hours before this General Assembly, leaving no time for meaningful consultation with capitals. Budget sufficiency. The regular fund level of $92,300,600 is inadequate to meet the organization's agreed mandates and risks, impairing its effectiveness and relevance to the peoples of the Americas. A budget that does not keep pace with inflation and institutional needs will weaken core capacities across democracy promotion, human rights, multidimensional security, and integral development. Managerial flexibility. We are further concerned that constraints introduced on the allocation and reallocation of approved funds unduly limits the Secretary General's capacity to manage the General Secretariat effectively within the mandate framework established by member states. Medical Benefits Trust Fund, actuarial integrity and fiduciary risk. Capping the regular fund transfers to the Medical Benefits Fund at 8% of net assessments overrides the Trust's declaration, actuarial premium setting, and by holding employer contributions artificially low, forces shortfalls to be covered by liquidating trust assets, eroding the fund and widening its actuarial deficit. As trustee, the General Secretariat, OAS, is obligated to exercise the highest degree of good faith and may not use trust assets for its own benefit, for example, to meet regular fund obligations. A structure that effectively requires the trust to cover current year employer costs could expose the organization to claims by plan participants alleging breach of fiduciary duty. In light of the foregoing, Antigua and Barbuda respectfully records this explanation of its position. We stand ready to work constructively with all delegations to uphold full transparency and predictability in decision-making, to safeguard the actuarial soundness and legal integrity of the Medical Benefits Trust Fund by aligning employer contributions with independent actuarial determinations, to ensure appropriate managerial flexibilities for the Secretary General within a robust accountability framework, and to calibrate the budget envelope to realistic needs so that the organization can deliver on the mandates entrusted to it. Antigua and Barbuda requests that this explanation be circulated as part of the official record of this decision. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda. We've taken note of your observations, and they will be included as you requested today. I'd like to give the floor to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. You have the floor, Ambassador.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines desires to lift its ad ref on paragraph 5 under trust personnel 5B. And under the section measures to encourage timely payment of quotas, item 22, Alt A, we also remove that we are in consultations. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We've taken note of your indications and remarks, and we appreciate your flexibility. Colleagues, we've heard the observations made here, and as we stated at the Permanent Council, after intense negotiations, we have some texts that we heard this morning, especially those indicated by Ambassador Namor. Therefore, the text does not enjoy consensus, and we will need to work on some paragraphs that are still pending and need synchronization. Therefore, I'd like to consult with delegations, and I'd like to give the floor to Brazil before we decide on a course of action. Ambassador Belli? Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to call your attention to the fact that we have two issues open. 3, with respect to the limits on jobs in the General Secretariat, and ABC, and then Section 22, with respect to measures to encourage prompt quota payments. Those are the two areas that are still pending. And if possible, to facilitate our work, I'd like to request through you the opinion of Legal Affairs with respect to paragraph 3. Inasmuch as there is clear evidence, as Bahamas said, that there are contradictions with the OAS Charter. So if it's possible, if there was agreement, perhaps this paragraph with ABC need to be eliminated. We would therefore save time at the General Committee or here at the plenary. Thank you.
Señor embajador,
Ambassador, before we decide on a course of action, we're going to support your request, and we're going to ask Dr. Jean-Michel Arregui with respect to the query that was made. And Doctor, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. With respect to the query made by the delegation of Brazil, Article 103 of the OAS Charter provides that it is an essential task of the Secretary General to comply with the work of the General Secretariat. And the second paragraph says, inter alia, that it can determine the number of staff at the organization. Then, to this end, standards and rules must be taken into consideration, but the determination of this number is the exclusive attribution of the Secretary General. And these provisions do not oblige the Secretary General to delegate this power to any other body. So it is the exclusive attribute of the Secretary General in keeping with Article 103B to determine the number of employees and staff of the General Secretariat. Thank you very much, President.
muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Having heard the legal opinion of Dr. Jean-Michel Arregui, I'd like to offer the floor to delegations to hear your opinions and perspectives. Thank you.
Delegación de Argentina tiene.
Argentina, you have the floor, and thereafter Bahamas. Chair, it seems to me that at least based on the meetings in which I and my team participated in, formally or informally, well, I think the feeling of the general consensus was to have a budget ceiling I think that budget ceiling is not being debated based on this clarification that was made by Legal Affairs with respect to the number of positions that the Secretary General may determine based on his own powers and his remit. I interpret that eliminating this part of the draft budget would not affect the main point of consensus, which was clearly expressed by members, which is the budget ceiling. Therefore, I believe it would be intelligent and efficient and facilitate this process that we delete this part of the draft resolution as Brazil suggested and as requested by Bahamas. We should maintain the budget ceiling and eliminate this because it would not affect our proposal, and we do not want to step on the SG's toes with respect to his power. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your suggestion with respect to course of action. Bahamas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's my understanding that time is money, and we wasted a lot of time and we wasted a lot of money. Yesterday evening, my delegation asked for this to be struck, and whatever time it is now, at 12:11, we are back to where we started. To be emphatic, my delegation my delegation would respectfully insist that this paragraph in its entirety be struck, and any future endeavors to constrain the Secretary General should at least include the conversation with the Secretary General, out of courtesy. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nimor. I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Hector Arce from Bolivia and then Antigua and Barbuda. Thank you very much, Chair. And congratulations on your appointment, and you're doing a great job presiding over this meeting. We would like to join the position of Brazil, supported by other delegations, and ratify the opinion of the Director of Legal Affairs with respect to legality. But beyond that, let's not forget that we have some rationality behind this. And those of us who are familiar with the management of this organization, well, we know that this provision could have impeded the Secretary General from benefiting the organization. For example, a person who has been at the organization for 30 years in an important position and has 4 or 5 children, and that person retires. Now, that money could be used to hire 2 people at a lower level, and that capacity that we need, because we need to save and be efficient with our funds, that needs to be in the hands of the Secretary General and not limited by a resolution. We need to have rationality, legal rationality, and also management rationality to benefit our organization. So we support this proposal, and we believe the entire paragraph needs to be deleted. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Arce. We have taken note of your perspective, and we will consider this for the course of action that we will decide on together. And Antigua and Barbuda, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, my delegation did express during the CAP meetings its concern that the paragraph in question contradicts the Charter's provisions that the Secretary General is solely responsible for the administration of the General Secretariat. Therefore, my delegation joins the delegations of the Bahamas and Brazil and Bolivia and Argentina in requesting that this paragraph be struck from the resolution. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias por.
Thank you so much for your observations and for the recommendation. As you will recall, during the debate yesterday, one of the recommendations of the chair was to delete this paragraph from the draft resolution. and we did not go back to review this recommendation. This has been clearly spoken to by Dr. Jean-Michel Arrigui. We cannot adopt a text that whose legality is questionable. So the chair, or rather the president of the General Assembly, recommends that the entirety of this paragraph be deleted. If there is no objection to this course of action, I will proceed to adopt the removal of this entire paragraph. In other words, the limit on job positions financed by the regular fund. Paragraph 3 of this draft resolution. If there is no objection, it is so removed, and that decision was adopted. Thank you very much for your valuable recommendations. And now there is section 22 that we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting. I wanted to submit to your consideration that the text be looked at and negotiated in a general committee so we can continue our debate about the details and the considerations that the delegations will present to the plenary session. If we all agree, I will install the general committee in keeping with the rules of procedure. It is so agreed.
Colegas,
Colleagues, the general committee will consider the paragraphs of the draft resolution, the negotiation of which has not been concluded. And we need to complete our work. I am in your hands. I don't know how much time we'll have in the committee. You need to decide 1 hour, 2 hour. 2 hours? Do you think we will complete this work by 2 p.m.? So the general committee will be open until 2 p.m. for work. To this end, we will facilitate the work of the committee to elect a rapporteur that will present a report to the plenary with respect to the outcome of the tasks that were given to this general committee. In keeping with the rules, we will have a report on the debate, the conclusions that were drawn with respect to the draft resolutions and the recommendations of the General Committee. This will be presented to the plenary of the General Assembly, and at this time, we will proceed to elect the presidency or chair of the General Committee. I'd like to open the floor so that colleagues can suggest or nominate who will be heading up the General Committee.
si me lo permiten hacer una recomendación.
If you would allow me to make a recommendation to facilitate this decision-making process, the vice chair of the CAP was the alternate delegate of Canada, and perhaps our vice chair, Eric Luguya, could preside over the General Committee. If you support my decision, I would appreciate it. And so if so, we can proceed to agree. It is so adopted. Furthermore, I'd like to also ask for your support to appoint a vice chair of this General Committee. during the negotiation process, if you would allow me, I wanted to highlight the work of all delegations. In particular, I'd like to submit to your consideration that you support the possibility of having St. Lucia, Chernaya. Would you support this? I would ask the plenary to support my decision in this regard. Thank you very much. It is so agreed. Ms. Vice Chair, there are no further items to address. And so we also need to have a rapporteur for the committee. The committee needs to elect their own rapporteur. We want to install the committee, and I appreciate your flexibility, and we have until 2 p.m. and hopefully before the committee's work will be done. Thank you.